And we're live with our 281st episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host, Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We're trying out some new things today. We're running a little bit behind, but when the cat's away, the mice will play. I don't know, whatever you want to say, right? I've got a couple of updates before we dive into today's show. We've got quite a bit to talk about, especially in the ML space, right? AI space. It seems to be affecting everything as we expected. At some point, we're going to have to get back to doing some code reviews and doing some live stuff utilizing the AI processes that we are teaching people. But for today, I did want to mention first off that there will be a new training opportunity that's going to be up on the site this week. Within the next couple of days, we're going to do practical secure code review again in May. So May 12th and 13th. If you are looking for an opportunity to jump in, that'll be a virtual training. Feel free to sign up. We'd love to have you. And then there will be an opportunity to do our Harnessing LLMs course for application security at DEF CON this year. We are taking that course to DEF CON. We'll be teaching people how to utilize LLMs for everyday AppSec tasks, from dynamic to static to threat modeling to everything else from an AppSec perspective. So jump in there. You can check out all of these on training.absoluteappsec.com. I don't think the link to DEF CON is up yet on the site. That will be up there shortly as well. Otherwise, I will be at B-Side Salt Lake City this week. If anyone is around and would like to chat, would love to see you. Redpoint is sponsoring as well. But I'll be speaking actually on enumeration, user enumeration specifically, some of the new techniques that we've been utilizing to identify enumeration, utilizing AI. But the basis of the talk is that enumeration is one of those flaws that we see in pretty much every application that we test. Now, whether or not it's a flaw can be argued based on the application itself, right? A social media application, who cares if you can enumerate, Seth Law, right? Like that's to be expected. Even like Gmail doesn't necessarily care about enumeration, but a lot of sensitive like applications that host PHI and PII are the ones that we're concerned about. And the ability to actually figure out who is in that, what the usernames are, becomes a pretty serious security issue. And I'm stumbling over my word. So that's what I'm talking about.
Finance, like HR, like there's all kinds of different business purposes that definitely do not want you to know other users' credentials.
Yeah. So we'll be doing a white paper as well. Like if you look at, if you watch like either the Absolute AppSec or Redpoint Security blog, we'll be putting up some details around that. Just because it is, it's one of those things that we run into pretty much daily and are identifying new techniques to actually go after it and speed up that process, because it does seem like fairly low-hanging fruit, and a lot of companies just struggle with it. Anyway, so that's where I'll be this week, and I don't know. Outside of that, I did want to give a shout out to DryRun. DryRun.security is our sponsor today. I was going to let Ken talk a little bit, about DryRun. I know there's something that you wanted to bring up before we dive into topics.
Yeah. So if you are a listener and you are going to be at our RSA, Aegis of AI Security, we've got it's an invitation only event. But you can reach out to me if you're on our Slack. And if you don't know how to get to our Slack, you can go to absoluteappsec.com. Can't miss it. Right at the very top there, it says Slack. You can click on that. You can get into the Slack workspace with us. If you DM myself or Seth, we'll give you an invite to this event. I know Seth will be speaking. I'll be speaking, but so will Daniel Miesler and Jason Haddix and Ken Huang, who's currently basically moving the needle for OWASP on LLM and AI security. So it should be a very, very good event, but it is very small and it is invite only. So again, if you would like to join us, just join Slack, DM us for requests. Also, the other thing I was going to mention is I recently in March and then last week spent mostly in March, we'll say, 4 different bake-off comparisons of our product versus all the incumbents, the folks that have been around for a while that do SaaS all in a very similar derivative way, same way we've been doing it for decades versus our tool. I think the latest one's interesting because I actually show even when we failed to find things too. I mean, I keep it very transparent, very open and honest. However, I think, if you're a practitioner and you're curious, like, hey, what's the difference between the old way and the new way? You should definitely go check out those posts. You'll get a feel for what the logic flaws, the authorization issues, nuanced problems that require code interpretation and actually understanding what's going on versus looking for a predefined set of rules. Very different outcomes. So go check that out if you're so inclined. Other than that, yeah, I don't know, Seth. I mean, just pretty much gearing up. I mean, a few weeks left until RSA. So I know I'm going to be out there for a week between B-sides and the end of RSA. I know, like, I don't know what your schedule is, but I know you and you're doing speaking, you're doing 2 panels. I know I'm doing speaking in 2 panels. I'm also running 3 separate workshops at RSA for AppSec with LLMs. If folks are keen to drop by, but yeah, what's your schedule look like that week?
Yeah, I'm down for B-side San Francisco, and then I'll be there for the first couple of days of RSA. Most of I'll be attending the Aegis event. That's running the panel there, running the panel at B-sides, and otherwise it's like I've got people that I'm meeting, and we've got open, trying to balance out all the other needs that I have, right? Yeah, so I will be around if you are in town, would like to catch up, whatever it is, go grab drinks, that sort of thing. Love to see people. And it's usually a hodgepodge of, drinks, events, everything else that's going on, trying to decide how much of the actual RSA event you want to attend. I know we've talked about it in the past couple of podcasts, like how useful some of these events are from a business and a technical perspective, and what actually comes of it. RSA is pretty effective, usually just because there are a ton of people that are there, right? There's a lot of decision makers, there's a lot of people, there's some good technical content, there's the Aegis stuff, right? Like, there's a lot of interesting things going on, even if you aren't necessarily going to the show itself and to the the full RSA event. So excited to see people this next month, and multiple different events. Otherwise, I know we do want people to come to the Aegis event. If you are going to be if you're going to be at RSA, please reach out. Would love to have people come and attend. We've got some really interesting panelists and speakers that are going to be there. Cool. I'm excited too. It'll be fun. All right. So first things first today. The first article that we wanted to talk about is Taming the Wild West of ML Practical Model Signing with Sigstore. This is an article from Google on their blog, and is interesting from a supply chain perspective of machine learning models, right? So ML models that are out there, and how you actually know you are dealing with the model that you expect to deal with. From a supply chain perspective, it feels like a natural progression to me, but I wanted your take on this because you have actually been using, both commercial and open source models for a while. When we are using something like Amazon as the back end, or Anthropic, like one of the commercial vendors, it's fairly easy to be like, oh well, we just trust them to run the model that they say they're running, right? And so I'm wondering what your take is on this article, this ability to actually sign models or present some sort of validation that it is the model that you expect, what that gives you as a developer and as a consumer of these models, and where you expect that to go.
Hmm. Yeah, well, they expect where I expect that to go. I think that's interesting that you say that too, because my thoughts are this is exactly what I said was going to happen. Like, I don't remember when, but sometime in the last year when we covered Hugging Face having a couple different regular, just plain old supply chain attack issues. Like one was them finding like 9 or 11 malicious, like legitimately their malicious, intended to extract information um, models hosted on Hugging Face. Then we also saw, I think it was something like 1,500 valid leaked keys on GitHub from model owners, where once you get those keys, you can now push to Hugging Face and overwrite the model. So when those things happen, you and I discussed it, and we talked about just like how, it's no different from any other sort of software ecosystem. There's going to need to be, protections put into place and model scanning and whatever else, and MFA require of authors that own popular models, and a lot of the stuff that we talked with Miles about, just putting that all into this like AI space where like Hugging Face is the equivalent of, say, an NPM or a NuGet or something like that, right? Package management ecosystem. So I guess my point is that this is a good proactive step. Love it, and also totally expected that was going to come. Right? You're downloading like open source stuff. You've got to make sure that it's valid and the integrity's there. And so I don't know. And then to answer your last question about like where do I think it's going? I think it's just the continuation of what we had talked about. Where it's just like we're gonna have to do more in the security of that supply chain, or do more for the security of that supply chain in that AI, LLM, ML ecosystem. What do you think? I mean, like, you know, do you? Because I feel like you see the yes but side of things. So, is there with this one like a yes but?
Um, yes, but that, let's. My take is, initially I think like I was in that mode of, all right, this is what I expected. Kind of what you're saying, like this is a natural progression. Um, it's great to actually see. The issue that I have is it doesn't really solve any of the, the kind of the issues that we see as far as people attacking LLMs, right? Like, yes, it's the supply chain side of things, and this will continue to be an issue as people push out, potentially malicious ML models, especially on Hugging Face or some of the other places. There's always going to be that sort of supply chain confusion attack, and right, like something will actually happen there. If it's a signed model, it's a signed model, right? I don't necessarily think it changes the calculus as far as some of the other items that we have. Like they talk about this new wave of security threats, like data poisoning, prompt injection, prompt linking, prompt evasion. It doesn't do anything to address any of that, right? Like I have a hard time with, and so this is where I get into my but phase, right? I have a hard time with these claims that we're securing the underlying architecture of systems and infrastructure, and then claiming that it's taking care of problems that are running on higher layers of interactions with that infrastructure, right? We saw this, way back in the day with the web in general, like all of these websites claiming that they use defense level encryption and protections to make sure that people don't hack their systems. And realistically, it was just they were enabling SSL and HTTPS on their website. It did nothing to actually protect against any of the common attacks against web applications or against networks in general. yes, it protected the traffic as it was moving back and forth, and that's a good thing. But vendors have a tendency to overplay their hand when they implement something like this. They're like, look, we're securing all the things because we're using Sigstore now to sign our models. Hey, that's great, but you're still vulnerable to prompt injection, right? Or some of the other attacks against those LLMs. And it's a misunderstanding of what that actually does for the end consumer of the products in general. So that's where I get a little nihilistic or pessimistic about these sorts of controls as we roll them out, because on the one hand, I'm like, yes, that's great, because now as a developer, I can make sure that my provider is giving me the model that I expected and that I developed against. That's great. But if I flip around and then tell all my users, hey, I'm secure now because I'm checking this model signature, I'm doing a disservice for the actual security of my prompts and everything else that goes into it.
But I don't think that's on Google, right? Like Google clearly stated in this blog post. No, because I know where you're going with this. So I just want to reiterate for those listening, like this is really just more the expectations that people are reading this and getting it wrong and thinking like this is like it's probably very similar to many things where it's like, okay, well, I did this thing. Does that mean we're good now? Or I'm verifying the integrity of the signature store. So like, are we okay now? It's like, no, this is, not really, not the case.
It's one piece.
Security's an onion. Yeah,
yep.
exactly.
Yeah, it's one piece,
Really
and
it is layered.
Yeah, any tools there are great, right? Like, and that's it's giving us an overall assurance, but from an overall score of using machine learning models and LLMs, it doesn't really like change the calculus that much, I guess, is where I'm at. It's preventing an attack that will happen in the future for sure, because we've seen that in other watering hole style attacks with other supply chains and with other package repositories or model repositories, and that is a good thing, because somebody's going to use that to attack all of the all the big players at some point.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they will, and actually it is a supply chain. So I'm glad that you called that out, that there are big companies who will be using these models, these open source models. They'll fine tune them. And because like I've said this before, and I don't know if folks realize, like, obviously you can't train. I'm not training like some commercial LLM that's hosted on some platform, right? Like they train those models and you get what you get. Some of them offer things called knowledge bases or something like that, which is really just RAG, which is really just what MCP is. But in any case, whatever. We'll get to that. But in any case, why was I saying that? Basically, you're limited to, if you want to like train things, truly train a model, you use open source models is what people gravitate towards. So that there are, because I even know, like I keep a pulse on competitors and I keep a pulse on the market and everything. And I can definitely point to companies that at least claim that they fine tune open source models. So my point being, if you are using these companies and they are using these models, that is just like everything else in the supply chain. Just like if they had imported some really bad, I don't know, PyPy thing and it was vulnerable and you use their web app and their app use that, it's pretty common sense, right? But like, I do think it highlights that there are going to be some large tech players at risk if they don't, if we don't start buttoning up the supply chain of the AI world. But I'm curious, like also a risk while we're on the risks of AI. Let's talk about vibe coding for a moment.
Vibe coding.
That's all in the news.
Yeah, it's the new way to actually develop an application, right?
Do any of your clients admit to you that they do that yet?
No, I haven't gotten that. I have not. Yeah. We'll see, right? But up to this point, we haven't. Like I posted the Wikipedia entry on vibe coding out there. So basically, for those of you that haven't investigated it yet, vibe coding is the use of AI to actually create applications, libraries, whatever it is, whatever code it is that you want without having to program a line of code, right? It's using the AI to actually generate this. I would argue it is actually an extension of test driven development. You put in what the outcome is, you have the AI generate code to do that, you test against it, and then you say whether or not it accomplished that task. The problem that we have here is that security is not always forefront with the vibe coding models, and whether or not the code is secure is going to be wholly dependent on the different models that are being used to generate that code, what they've been trained on, how they actually are putting things together, not to mention the dependencies and everything else that goes into it. There is going to be quite a bit of research on top of vibe coding as to whether or not it is actually secure or even recommended. I mean, as of right now, from an AppSec perspective, and I don't know where you would go with this, right, Ken? But if a client came to me and asked, "Hey, what do you think of vibe coding? We're going to start doing it," I'd be like, "Absolutely not." Not without having X, Y, and Z in place, from an AppSec perspective to make sure that anything that's being generated by those models, it meets the standards and the security requirements that we set in place. Now, that being said, right, like if we're doing security vibe coding, I've built security requirements into it. I'm doing test driven development. I've got a full suite of tests that's doing security testing on top of it. Um, I, I flip back and forth, right? I don't know, like, what is your take on vibe coding? Like, what are your expectations as someone that's actually seeing the code come out? Is this a good thing?
Yeah.
Is it a bad thing? Is it an insecure thing?
Oh man. Well, all right. So I read the link you posted about the Wikipedia, or the Wikipedia link you posted about vibe coding.
Mhm.
And because I was curious how, so I read the first part of it. I was curious how it like delineated what is vibe coding and what is not. So, and I internally like there's the, okay, if I'm giving you a prompt and you're just like writing, I don't know, multiple controllers, or maybe you're just writing the entire app for me. Yeah, there's going to be some of course there's going to be some insecure issue, like, or there's going to be security issues. It's going to be insecure, I would imagine. um we've had engineers, and this is something I'd love to pull in Pete to talk about. He's been vibe coding entire apps just to do some research. um More will come of that later for everybody listening, but for now, um we have that to go on, and his experiences there. And also, anyways, several fully driven by an LLM developed apps, and yeah, there are some security issues for sure. There's no doubt. They work pretty well, believe it or not. So that's great. But here's the thing. Here's the issue I have. Right, there's got to be some delineation between asking the LLM to write a function, like giving a description of a function and writing that, and the distinction between, like, say, hey, write me or scaffold out an entire app. And the reason I say that is that human attention can, like, if I ask it to build a function that does something, like, I can look at that function, just with my eyeballs, and I can kind of read line by line and be like, yeah, all right, that's cool. I also have a security background. I also have developed software for many, many, many years. For me, that's easy. That's easy to just say, like, yeah, do that, and then, like, I can vet it and move on. And it is amazing for me. And yeah, even to your point, I can write tests around that, or have it write tests around that. So great, whatever, right? But again, my issue is when you have, if it's more than a human being can quickly parse, then and you're just accepting that. I don't know about that, right? Like that's where you're saying like, oh, I'm just trusting. And I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't just like, look, as much as I'm bullish on LLMs for like software security, I'm bullish on those with a really complex process with a lot of bells and whistles built in that you don't get out of the box just by throwing code in an LLM. Okay, there's a distinction that has to be made. Some products like ours, we do an incredible amount of work. We can't just like throw code at that and know that we're going to get a good response. It doesn't work like that. So no, I wouldn't say like I have this like massive trust and belief in LLMs. There's so much testing and evaluation that goes on day to day that it's like I know where the pop where things fall down. I know where issues get introduced, right? So I don't have that like blind trust. And certainly I don't have blind trust in LLMs generating code for people on a massive scale where they're not doing much evaluation. And this gets me to the last final statement I'll make here. My real concern is people who don't have experience using these tools and not having that experience to vet what's coming out of it. I don't
Yeah.
care if a senior software engineer wants to even do what I said, which is right. I do care that they review it, but I don't care if like they want, I don't know, several files to be generated by an LLM, and then they take that step of reviewing it. But I definitely would not let a junior engineer just draft up a, like big whole swaths of my code base using vibe coding. That just doesn't. Yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah.
And also like actually, sorry, I can give you one. I know I'm being talkative here, but I'll give you
No,
one
you're good.
last thing here. There are weird things that happen. So, like, one thing I know that's going to happen with LLMs are like, hey, we're making you asked for this, so I'm building just this with no thought about other parts of the code base that, like, basically long-term maintainability and like where things could break down if you need to make changes and refactor later. Just the elegance that really, really skilled humans bring to the table when writing code. But we actually had a concrete example of this. One of our engineers has dyslexia and wrote a word incorrectly. The LLM was like, "Hey, you wrote this incorrectly. Like, do you want to fix that?" And it was like, "Oh yeah, sure." Forgetting that that same function was with that naming convention was used everywhere. Thankfully, we have robust enough testing to catch that, before it ever makes its way to production. But my God, like, could you imagine if we did it, right? So my
Mhm.
point being, it doesn't take into account always everything else going on in the app. And so it's like, yeah, in this like zone of where I'm concentrating, I can make whatever changes you want, but I may not factor and often don't the wider code base, even with access, like a windsurf or a cursor. Um, anyways, all right.
Yeah.
I said my piece there.
No, and you're absolutely right when it comes to that, right? Like this quote, and to their credit, like the guy at OpenAI that actually came up with this term, right? LLM generates software, shifting the programmer's role from manual coding to guiding, testing, and refining the AI generated source code. All right. That's exactly what you're saying, right? And we've done this for a while, right? Like, how long have we been using GitHub Copilot to actually help generate and scaffold out various code, various applications? Like, developers have been using that for a number of years now. It's an accepted pattern, and vibe coding should not necessarily take away that guidance, testing, refining, and use and oversight that a programmer has. It just kind of shifts the role from, hey, I'm manually slinging 1,000 lines of code to I'm having the AI generate 1,000 lines of code. And then I'm validating what's actually coming out of that to make sure that it matches my expectation. So it becomes more an exercise in prompt engineering, to your point. Like, hey, knowing how this application is intended to be used, how this code is intended to be used in the wider application itself. Because even Windsurf, even Cursor, these IDEs, they are limited in how much code they're sending along or analyzing when they build out specific portions of that. So I expect it to get better over time. I'm not wholly down on vibe coding out, when it is applied appropriately, like you are saying. It's more of that junior like developer that's using it to build a huge application, does not necessarily have uh, an idea of what it should look like. without some senior representation, and then that actually becomes a problem. And to this point, right, like this comment that just came in, have had issues with LM incorporating deprecated libraries. Yeah, fixing that requires retraining the model, right? Like, and Andrew brought that up as well in Slack, how the models that we're using, the security mistakes that are being made is due to the human coding it is actually trained upon. So it's not necessarily just that we're depending on these LLMs to build code. They're not up to date with the latest and greatest. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like obviously retraining the LLM is one way to do that. And if you're not using well, if you are using a commercial LLM, you're obviously like beholden to your commercial LLM provider. And at the
Mhm.
same time, if you are, but if you can't retrain, you can, and also like that whole concept of retraining though, that's like not a non-trivial process. So like,
Mhm. Yeah.
how often do you really want to do that? And then of course here, if we're talking about using RAG, probably a little bit more. I mean, if you know what languages and frameworks your organization is going to be using, yeah, then either RAG or retraining. I'd also add in a little bit of reflection. We don't talk a lot about that, except for in our course, but reflection is sort of a really good prompting technique to get the LLM to basically vet itself. But in any case, you're right. You have to do. I guess my point is, you're right. You have to do some extra work now, and it's like, yeah, that's problematic. They do recommend deprecated libraries. Yeah, and it's funny, they even recommend deprecated libraries in the LLM ecosystem. So, like,
Yeah.
if you're using LangChain, they'll even give you like old example. And that, to be fair to them, like LangChain changes so often, but they'll give you bad examples of old stuff that will no longer work, and you'll just get deprecation warnings about. So, yeah, you're right. It's just, it really does require, like, yes, this can speed up my workflow, but I have to already really know what I'm doing. If I'm going into this blind, like, junior to mid, and I'm just sort of like, or probably more junior, yeah, you're gonna, anyways,
Yeah, well, and
you're
that's
gonna,
where I mean
you're gonna have some
that's where the
issues.
jokes come out, right? Like that's where you've seen, I don't know, like if you've seen any of the memes about vibe coding from the different programmer chats or subreddits or whatever it is, and it's all about like, oh well, I vibe coded this app, and now like it has access to AWS, and I've just been charged thousands of dollars of compute cycles, right? Because it publicly exposed my keys and my credentials, and we've been trained on that link from Truffle Security that Andrew dropped into chat, that DeepSeek had all of these keys actually embedded in it and was trained on code where keys are embedded in source code. So it's going to tell developers to use keys in source code because it thinks that's the way that these applications should be designed. And so without some sort of reflection, without some sort of security process and testing on top of that, you're going to get bitten. And that's where kind of the jokes come from, is the use by untrained, individuals. I don't even know if they're engineers or developers at this point, but untrained individuals that are actually trying to use vibe coding to create their latest and greatest SaaS tool. You're going to get what you put into it, which is not a lot of expertise, and whatever that was trained on is what's going to be coming out in your code. And any of those security issues are going to cause you problems in the long term, or maybe even in the short term when it comes down to it.
Yeah, and I will say Andrew brings up a good point. He's like, these problems existed with junior developers without vibe coding, and I'm like, yeah, that's fair. And it's probably, how is that mitigated? Usually, it's mitigated by pairing with and having reviews by very experienced people. So the question then becomes, will that part of the process be replaced by LLMs, right? And maybe that's fine. Like, I can honestly say, like, okay, so there's a product that works similar to dry run, but it's not security focused at all. It doesn't do anything security wise. But it's got a similar flow in that it does code review. And sorry, Code Rabbit is the name of the product. And you know, here's my take. I still want, like, ugh, this gets into weird territory. I still want some pairing with a senior person if I've got a junior developer, whether that's vibe coding or whether that's them writing code. That having been said, if I can use an automated system to flag when I need to pull in that experienced developer, that might be good enough. And oftentimes that's kind of what we do anyways with linting tools and whatnot. But it does raise a whole bunch of questions in my mind. It's like, yeah, what's the way to protect? I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, how do you handle that experience when you will have junior people? They may not have a senior human being reviewing their code. They might be using tooling. Is that enough? Right? It genuinely, it's an open question I have. Is that enough? I do think, and I've watched CodeRabbit evolve a little bit, and I think it does call out some pretty sweet functional issues at times, things that can lead to, yeah, just like breakage and maybe bad standards, or you know long-term maintainability might be an issue. I don't know though. Like it's is that your canary in the coal mine, and you pull the experienced person in when you need to. It's just, and then there's other ways to skin that cat, which is more about what are the type of changes you're doing, right? Like if you're doing changes that are, I don't know, like adding in some CSS styling or a React component or something, that's not quite the same as adding on to your authorization or modifying your authorization somehow, right? In your API or whatever. So I don't know, man. It's sort of like it's a weird territory to be into.
Yeah, it is. And I would go back to kind of that definition of, all right, like the developers in general that are doing vibe coding, you've got to build good standards, guiding, you've got to test, you've got to refine. Um, if you don't have a good set of security requirements or good coding standards in place, vibe coding should not be for you or is not for you, right? From a security perspective. Because without the tooling and the knowledge around what should actually go into it, um, I, yeah, I just think it's going to bite you in the end. And to Andrew's point as well, right? Like he's saying that he feels like we're holding vibe coding to standards that many developers don't even follow. I I agree, right? But I also expect us to do better, across the board. And I would argue that those developers do need to be held to a higher standard, right? I expect, even junior developers to generate code that is readable, that is proper, right? Like to learn some maturity, to be guided in that direction. And if vibe coding is not also providing that same sort of support and analysis, then what are we doing, right? Like, again, we get what we deserve if that's what we depend upon.
Yeah, and I also think it's fair to point out that all of this is brand new. Like my company's been around for what, a little over 2 years, right? And pretty much near the beginning of it is when, but not quite at the beginning, but nearish the beginning is when things sort of started to be like ChatGPT came out a little bit after we got started, or were incorporated, or whatever the legal definition of starting a company is, right? So pretty new stuff is my point. And like, again, I know I beat up on SaaS tools all the time, but just take security tools in general, not one specifically, but just take a lot of security tools in general. They've been around for fucking decades doing the same crap that we all complain about. But like those don't evolve at all. And we're like, all right, we'll use them. We'll pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for these things or more, right? So like we do have to look at ourselves here and say like, yes, but right, do the Seth thing. Yes, but yes, of course, like it's got flaws, and LLMs aren't perfect, but you have to realize they've also only been around for like a half a second. Things
Yeah.
will definitely improve on that front. I think security has, especially application security and product security, I feel like there's a lot we can do to help, in this regard, since this is definitely directly touching our space. It's kind of an extension of what we're already doing, right? This is a new product or a new area of expertise that we can potentially influence and help out with. So my point being is, I would argue if you, since I've worked with these things in the beginning and I saw how poorly they performed between the beginning and now, it's like, man, give them another 2 or 3 years. I don't know. It's like, so anyways, just let's not hammer on them too much when we still are using the same tools for decades that don't work properly, and that we all complain about. So
Yeah,
hard to
and
look in the mirror on that one.
it is. And I don't want to get down, and that's why I keep going. I don't know if you can tell that I'm waffling a little bit on vibe coding, right?
Same.
Because I feel like this is the future, right? You learn how to architect an application, how it's well structured, how security requirements should actually be fed. You can feed all of that from a RAG perspective into AI and make that the background for the code that's coming out of it. And especially if you have things like specific code standards that you can supply to it, the code there will probably be fairly good. And I can see using that, especially where I have used GitHub's Copilot in the past. And it has increased my own productivity. This is the next step in that evolution. So, yeah, take it with a grain of salt, but it's going to get better and we're going to learn how to use it appropriately. And, you know, but I would still like someone in charge of that process that has a background in both security and software engineering in order to generate that code to make sure that it is up to snuff. That's the caveat that I have with it right now. And maybe eventually we can get away from it, but that is definitely my caveat, or that would be my recommendation to a client currently.
Yeah, same. If I was in your shoes, I would be like, well, until anyone has like better metrics around this, until we know more, just be safe. If these are changes that frankly, like, you really shouldn't be putting junior developers on certain projects, right? We all know that. And if you're yeah, you got to use them correctly, let them level up with time before you give them things that are very, very scary if they go wrong. So
Yep.
hopefully people are doing that, and so it shouldn't be as high stakes as this shouldn't be as big of a problem as it. But if you're a senior developer and you're using vibe coding, yeah, please vet that. Like, make sure you're vetting what you're submitting up to. And again, it's not even from a security perspective. It's actually, I don't, and that's funny, is like, we're security people. This is a security podcast talking about security things. And the whole time I'm talking about this, I'm actually less thinking about this from a security perspective. I'm actually thinking about this just from like the things that keep me up right now as a CTO, basically, maintainability, misspelled things that, could break. Anyways, it's funny. It's funny to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and this actually feeds into one of the other articles that we were that was on our list. And this is Google's launch of their Sec Gemini model, right? And we can just touch on this shortly. But this is a model that they have put together specifically with security in mind, right? It's experimental right now, but it's actually being trained against various security things, I guess, right? Like, there's not a lot in that article as far as what they're actually, building things on. But it's, let's see, what is it saying here?
Cybersecurity, it's outperformed other models using the cybersecurity threat intelligence root cause mapping benchmark, which evaluates an LLM's ability to understand the nuances of vulnerability descriptions, identify vulnerabilities, underlying root causes, and accurately classify them according to the CWE taxonomy. And I feel like, by the way, hopefully this maybe helps in the supply chain world. That's been my thing, is like, SCA is, the best thing that I've seen in SCA personally has been like the attempt at reachability analysis, which is a very difficult manually intensive task, or has been. And we've had like at least I think 2 separate people on that have talked about their research in that world of like doing the manual validation of, is a C like how critical is a CV? How is it actually vulnerable? So yeah, maybe this is going to be useful in the SCA world.
Yeah, it should be, right. And from a threat perspective as well, right? I start to think about monitoring um, of traffic and malware and other things that are, that pop up. This is another space where this could be incredibly useful. Full disclosure, I've asked for access to it just so like we can do some research into it from a security perspective as we're analyzing things for clients. It becomes very interesting to know what sort of threats would come out of this. And I'm fully expecting to utilize something like this in harnessing LLMs, right? Like from a threat detection perspective or threat modeling perspective. If we're looking at code, if we're looking at a specific website or a specific application, there are markers that are in there that something like Sec Gemini could be used for to help identify and speed up that process. And you know that outside of that, right, like we're going to see more and more, and this was part of my prediction initially when LM started to get popular, is we're going to see these very niche specific models that are useful for security tasks or development tasks. And you could use them for other purposes as well, but in general we're going to start going to companies, especially commercial LLMs, specifically for the effectiveness of the models that they are generating and the use cases that we have. So I'm going to be more likely, I mean, we're already seeing this, right? Like I am more likely to use Claude models when I'm analyzing code and I'm interacting with security tasks because of the output that I'm seeing and the usefulness of those models, as opposed to something like Gemma or Gemini or some of the other places. Like we've struggled with some of the open source models and how they actually understand security questions that we're throwing at them, right? And so in general, we're going to shift that focus to, hey, we have models that are very specific to security, to coding, and our specific use cases dictate our use of models and dictate which companies we actually turn to for those models.
You are correct, and going a step further, it's not just the request and response flows; it's also the embeddings aspect. So
Mhm.
having, which is like the if for those who are listening who don't know what embeddings are, think of it as a way to store data in a format that the LLM can understand, right? So if it needs to reach into a database and collect something that's relevant to the query, the question that's been asked, it will do that. How it does that, however, is through very complex dimensional relationship that it creates between things that are, you know, like each other. So like classic example would be apples and oranges. Those are both fruit. They're close to each other. Those would be near each other in in a dimensional space, I guess is what you'd say in an embedded database. Why is that cool? Because if it's domain specific, like Seth is saying, so I don't know whether it's even within security, like this cybersecurity LLM mentioned things like threat intel. That's totally different than AppSec. Well, for the most part, right? Very different from AppSec. It also mentioned pulling in OSV stuff, which is what kind of made me think of SCA. And so, anyways, consider those two different domains, right? So if you do embeddings that are specific for one domain or another, you get like better results as you query your embedded data. So there's other, I guess that's really useful, especially in like a RAG or MCP. These are useful bits of information to have access to for the LLM. So especially if it gets the dimension, or excuse me, the relationships in a domain specific way down, just makes everything more accurate is what I'm really trying to say, and performant. So
Yeah.
yes, Seth,
Yeah.
you're right. And not just in one way, multiple ways.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, I don't know if there's much else more to say there on the Sec Gemini stuff, outside of I'm going to be interested to see what comes of it, right? Like what sort of research pops out of it, how effective it is, whether or not the other models are going to catch up quickly, because that has happened in the past, especially with Anthropic and OpenAI just pushing the envelope and trying to maintain their market share across those different domains. It'll be interesting to see, but it's another tool to throw at it, right? Like I definitely will be using it once it comes out to compare and contrast with the with Anthropic and with with the other models that we currently have in place.
Do you have time for one more article, or should we wrap it up?
I believe I have time, right? Yeah, let's go for it.
I wanted to maybe talk about this CodeQL one, if that's cool.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, well,
switching topics.
Yes, just this is a non-LLM one, so for those who would like to never hear about LLMs again, you can tune back in now. I'm sure there are folks here getting sick of us talking, well, the world talking about it. Wait, what's happening with Slack? Oh, that was weird. I had a weird bug with Slack. Okay, it's in there. It's in both channels. Yes, this is Praetorian researchers who uncovered this flawed. Did you get a chance to read this one yet, Seth?
I haven't been through it, so I'm looking at it now.
Yeah, it's pretty lengthy then. So I'll just try to actually, let me pull it up on my screen and maybe share as we walk through it. It's pretty cool though. I thought it was worth mentioning, especially since, me having worked at GitHub for so long, I'm always keen to sort of, see anything GitHub related. Yeah, so, all right. So if you're not familiar, I'm going to throw out a few terms here. So GitHub Actions, if you don't know what GitHub Actions is, I'd be very surprised, but it's like a CI/CD run, right? So it does whatever you're looking to do in CI/CD. It runs whatever tasks, produces artifacts at the end of it. You can deploy from there up to wherever. So that's what we do. All right, here's the other thing is CodeQL. CodeQL is like their static analysis tool in GitHub Advanced Security. So CodeQL is what they're using there. And what this whole attack is based off of is, if you've never worked with GitHub Actions, there's a GitHub token value, which they call out somewhere here, multiple times. So there's a GitHub token. You never want that GitHub token to be retrieved. That GitHub token is supposed to be something that is inaccessible, but do understand that the GitHub action, calls in and retrieves this GitHub token to get permissions to do things, right? I think that's how it works. It has to pull in code from the repository. So the way it does that is, it gets a GitHub token and it can have some access. Here, they talk about some of the permissions, what they found. So when they went to the CodeQL GitHub repository, they noticed that they could that GitHub token had the following permissions: contents right, so it allows the token to create branches, create tags, and upload release artifacts. There's the action, which allows you to work with actions right, which allows you to work with actions and trigger workflow dispatch events. And finally, packages. You can write packages, so you can actually upload packages. So yeah, there's a lot of permissions with that token if you're able to retrieve it. I had to briefly go through this article before we hopped on. I didn't have a lot of chance to go through. I didn't have a ton of time to read through it. So I'm going to try to not butcher this. Definitely recommend everybody reading through this a little bit more. But from what I remember skimming this in the very beginning, right before we started, basically they wrote an action. What they noticed was it would run for about a second, and maybe even almost 2 seconds. The action would briefly expose a GitHub token that was rotated after an artifact was uploaded. So again, this is in the CodeQL repository. You're able to run an action. Like I said, for about a second, a GitHub token is actually accessible to you. But remember that as soon as it finishes in that second, that key gets rotated. It's no longer valid anymore. It's not usable to you. There is a brief period of time, however, between when the artifact that the action produces is uploaded and the key is then rotated. There's like a almost less than a second. So basically what they did, and I think this is a good example of that artifact racer. So they created a script that's going to try and outrun that process essentially, right? So they can grab the key, make the key useful before the artifact actually gets uploaded. So just in simple terms, it says first continuously queries the GitHub CodeQL Action repository, downloads the artifact from the PR check debug artifacts after failure, extracts the GitHub token from that artifact that's been uploaded, uses the GitHub token to make a new branch, uses the GitHub token to push the, and so I may have gotten this out of order, by the way, but in any case, so uses the GitHub token to make a new branch, uses the GitHub token to push poc.txt to this new branch, and then makes a new tag for that commit. And that's really what so the gist is that so continuously query. So they're trying to basically download an artifact. Once the action runs, they want to download the artifact, but they want to extract the GitHub token before that GitHub token's been deprecated and rotated. And they actually show uploading with that token new code to a new branch. There's some. This is the part that, like the rest of this, I kind of hadn't gotten to yet. But I really think it's worth, I really think it's worth a read, because obviously if you can push to a branch and set a tag and all that fun stuff, like it gets pretty wild as to what could go wrong here. Now, I will remind you that this is in the CodeQL repository, which means if malicious code gets into CodeQL, and one of their points was, if we got our malicious code into CodeQL, it's running on everybody's application and who's opted in on that. And guess what? Every application has secrets and other bad stuff. So we extract these secrets, use them, et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, like, give that article a read. I thought it was really fun research to watch and a cool way to tie multiple things together. So good job to John Stawinski over at Praetorian.
Yeah. I mean, and this is one of the things when you start teasing out these vulnerabilities, if you're looking at applications, you're looking at pipelines, whatever it actually is, don't discount an exposure just because the time is low, right? So 1 to 2 seconds, I know, and even earlier in my career, I probably would have done something similar where I'm like, man, I've only have 1 second with this token that it has any sorts of privileges. Is that really enough time to do anything? Without testing it out, you don't really know, right? I mean, I dig that they actually took that and were able to spin it to, hey, yeah, we can actually write to an unprotected branch. And we can do, at that point, we have RCE basically within the context of CodeQL and against all of these branches because of the permissions that are assigned to that specific action. It's like very cool research, right? Like, my takeaway as well. Yeah. So, just because it's a short-lived token doesn't mean that you can't do something with it, I guess is my main takeaway there.
Yeah, man, with the speed of people's home bandwidth speeds and or cloud bandwidth speeds and execution times being as fast as they are, or it's kind of like timing. It's actually like timing attacks with username. Speaking of username enumeration, which I know you're, so just same as timing attacks. Timing attacks used to be like this thing that it was very hard to detect, right? But now with speeds being what they are, with applications being performant, with everything being performant, it's actually pretty easy to see subtleties in timing variances. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what else I'm saying. What I just said means nothing. But anyways, it really didn't add anything. Anyways.
No, it does, right? Like, it's everything old is new again, right? Like the more research that we put into some of these edge cases that, I mean, I go back to that report, that Ware report. I give that talk on, modern versus old school, where there was a Department of Defense report that they did back in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s on cybersecurity and basically like time-based or time-sharing systems. And they call out all of these threats that are theoretical at the time. Things like access control issues, like what we talk about nowadays with broken, object level access or denial of service or timing issues within these time shared systems that were purely theoretical, like thoughts that they had way back in the day, all the computer scientists did. And we are seeing them exploited in this manner, right? Like it's a trove of, hey, there are possible edge cases and possible vulnerabilities and possible classes of vulnerabilities that we still haven't explored that somebody smart has thought about already and tried to build into these systems. And then we just ignored all of the, all the protections and thoughts that we put into it at some point. So in other words, it's a very complex system. And most of the applications that we use and design are incredibly complex. So there are going to be flaws. There's no getting around it. Yep. Anyway, okay, cool. Well, we've been going for an hour. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Again, if you want to catch us live, we will be at B-Side San Francisco. We've got the Aegis event. I will be at B-Side Salt Lake City. Any other travel? I know you're taking some time off, but anywhere else that you've got on your calendar before we call it today?
Nope.
Ken wants you to leave him alone for a week or two, and then we can talk, right?
No, I just I'm trying to travel a little less this year. Last year was really rough, man. I don't recommend ever doing that much travel like I did. So I'm trying to just be a little bit more strategic with where and when I travel instead of just being at every little event here and there. So, plus our company's grown too, so it's actually hard for me to do that much travel and maintain everything. So anyways, I don't know why I'm saying this. Whatever. RSA is my next thing. After that, I don't know. I guess
we'll see.
Figure out. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Thanks everybody for joining today. Thanks for the interactions. Catch us on Slack, and otherwise appreciate it. Send us across anything else you'd like to chat about, and we'll go from there. We'll see everybody next week.